Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Setting Up the Automation Center of Excellence. My name is David Goodstein and I'm a Member Services Coordinator for the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with EdgeVerve. We encourage you at any time to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the submit button. We will also be doing a couple polling questions, so we ask that you please participate and choose from the options provided. Today's webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recorded webinar. It will also be available on our website at rpai.com. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Dan Goodstein. Dan?
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the media and events business here at AI, as well as our sister organization, the Outsourcing Institute. And welcome to Setting Up an Automation Center of Excellence, sponsored by EdgeVerve. As promised, if you've heard any of our recent webinars, and based on many of the feedback surveys we've received from members, we wanted to make sure we do some webinars this year that are kind of go beyond introductory and into more advanced topics. And so when we asked our members what topics they wanted to hear about, COEs were towards the top of that list. So looking forward to today's session, and thanks again to the folks at EdgeVerve for sponsoring and helping tell this story. Before we begin, a quick overview on AI. We are a professional association and ecosystem focused on RPA, intelligent automation, and artificial intelligence. We provide a variety of resources, content, events, and services, whether you are on the buy side of the equation, the provider of services, or an influencer in this space. And we also have a sister organization, the Outsourcing Institute, that focuses on outsourcing and more recently on kind of digital transformation as a whole. So let me segue towards today's presentation. I've found that the best sessions over the years are ones that are told from the perspective of a client and a team who've kind of been there, seen the trials and tribulations, gone through the journey, and had some success. So I think we're fortunate enough to have that today. So let me introduce that team to you. First, we have Priya Radhakrishnan, the VP of Global Operations from Mr. Cooper, and she is joined by Sudhir Sundararam, who's the Program Manager for RPA implementation at Infosys. So Priya, maybe you could start and introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about my journey. I'm Priya Radhakrishnan. I'm a VP at Mr. Cooper. We were earlier called Nation Star Mortgage. We're one of the largest non-bank mortgage servicer. I'm a VP of the Information Systems team, the IT team, and I'm responsible for IT governance, operations, and also running special projects for the CIO. One of the biggest initiatives that we've been taking at Mr. Cooper is robotic process automation. So we've been going through that journey quite a bit. Just to talk a little bit about myself, about almost 2 decades of experience in IT. I've actually been privileged enough to see the IT side as well as the client side of it from all angles, if I may call that. I've spent about a decade at the offshore side of it. I've spent about 9 years on site here at the client places. I've been a service provider for almost about 17 years of my journey, and the last 2 years have been actually on the client side with Mr. Cooper, running some of these programs. We started our RPA journey last year. We've implemented one project, which is actually we are quite happy with and monitoring right now. And while we are initiating the second RPA project, we've gone down the journey of setting up a center of excellence, if you would call that. I have a little bit of a different take on how we talk about a COE, and I'll share some of that experiences as we talk along. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Priya. And Sudhir?
Hey, thank you, Dan, Priya, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. This is Sudhir Sundararam. I lead the client relationship and program management in Infosys for large RPA implementations using our product Assisted. In the last couple of years, I have been a part of several automation COE initiatives. We've seen quite a few challenges ranging from the very basic need for a COE, type of a COE, federated, centralized, or LOB specific, governance models, risks associated with running an automation program, and how COE can help, security controls, compliance, and so on. Today, I'm excited to share with you a few of my experiences in setting up a COE and running it, and hopefully these would help you in your automation journey as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir. So before I hand it off to you, Priya, to start the session, I wanted to take a quick poll and get a sense of where our audience is in the adoption of RPA. So very quickly, if you could let us know what stage of RPA adoption you are in. Are you kind of in information gathering mode, tech evaluation? Are you piloting? Are you in the middle of an RPA program, or is RPA a way of life for you today? So it looks like it's a mixed group. We've got some folks here that are just gathering information, but it looks like the bulk of the audience is kind of in the pilot or in the middle of an RPA program. So I'm guessing they're anxious to hear what you've gone through, Priya, and the success stories and the challenges. So I think it's a good time to pass it off to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dan. So folks, let's get started, right? This is what I'm going to cover today. A few of it rudimentary. What's RPA? What's our vision, strategy, sponsorship? COE to be, not to be. This is where I want to spend some time. And the 5 stages of the RPA COE, as I call it, and the key learnings from our journey. I have kept this from the perspective of how a client sees it, how we've seen it in implementing this. It's a little devoid of the technology part of it, but Sudhir and I can cover that. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to address that. What is RPA, right? Take just a few minutes. Of course, it's process automation, and as the definitions have it, by means of a robot, and it actually mimics human actions, which is key here. But the often big question that I'm always asked, especially from the end users, from our business users, isn't just this macros and scripts. I mean, we've been automating, quote unquote, since pretty much technology began, right? In my 2 decades of experience, I don't remember a time when, from an IT perspective, we've been telling business, saying that, hey, let's automate, automate, automate. So what is it? And business has been doing it. They've written a bunch of macros, they've written a bunch of scripts. IT has helped them automate a lot of stuff. So what's so different about robotic process automation, right? I think, to be very frank, in layman terms, if you look at it, it is actually the next generation, if you will, of macros and scripts. I know the technologists in us will reward a little bit and say, no, it's actually much more. But let's talk about it from the client's perspective, right? What makes it different? What is it that takes it to the next generation of evolution? It can be intelligent and cognitive. The automation thus far before RPA has not been as intelligent and doing cognitive intelligence. It can be autonomous and can respond to stimuli. So basically, you have your macros and scripts and a bunch of actions that you can do. It can actually listen, know when you have to do things, and actually call all of these things which are already automated. Basically, just act as a human does and mimic it. And the best of all, it can accumulate knowledge. And this is actually, I think, the game changer for robotic process automation. Let's take a step to see what is most key when you set up a center of excellence, right? Vision is absolutely key. But let's look at RPA, right? RPA is in its nascent stages. It's not, just starting up, but it's still a lot of hype. And if you look around and see, hey, can I talk to so many folks who have actually already successfully set up RPA COEs and they have been going around for years, you will find far and few between. So still for most organizations, it's a whole lot of hype and they are still trying to adopt. So it's okay not to know what exactly the end state is going to look like or the vision if it's not all that clear. I wanted to emphasize this because people focus so much on vision and say, if I don't have a very, very clear and defined vision, I cannot kick this off. From my experience, I beg to differ. As long as you know what direction you need to go, and if you evaluate at each step, if you're in the right direction, I think you've got the right vision. Strategy is extremely important, but again, I don't think, especially for RPA at this stages, it's not necessary to have a strategy plan to the nth detail. It's okay. As a matter of fact, I think it's extremely important to be able to be nimble and to refine your strategy as you go along. This is something that you're going to have to take a whole lot of people along with you. Your IT department is going to be a little skeptical, probably leading the way on RPA. Some of your business user partners are there. They are open to it. Some of them are still dragging their feet. People in that organization, if you look at a cross-section, are at various levels of maturity when it comes to RPA. And it's very important to take them along. And I think that's key to the strategy. And to achieve that, it's important to be able to be nimble and refine our strategy as we go along and course correct if we need to. Sponsorship, as in any big programs or center of excellence setting up, is extremely critical. Usually, a big program setting up a COE, we think about getting a lot of funding approved, and hence we need sponsorship. The way I look at an RPA COE, I think it's not so much about the initial investment, but it's more so from the commitment that it needs from your sponsors to make the organization under them understand, to shake everybody out of their comfort zone and say, go trust this new phenomenon, go trust and experiment with this new phenomenon, and don't worry, you have ways out if it doesn't work exactly the way you need to, and you can course correct. That sponsorship, I think, is most critical, not just for RPA COE, but actually for adoption of any new technology or trend. So let's talk about COE itself, right? I don't know about you all, but for me, two words that I hate most is initiatives and COE. They come with their own baggage. We do a lot of things around COE, but I think when it comes to the core of it, it becomes centralized. It becomes this group which actually is a know-it-all when it comes to that technology, that new trend that we are trying to do, but the dissemination suffers. Knowledge or excellence, right? It cannot be centralized or bottled up. It needs to be distributed. It needs to be distributed. So with that thought in mind, the way I look at COEs, and this is not just RPA, in my past, we have set up integration centers of excellences. We have set up, technology center of excellences, our innovation hubs. And I think they all follow the same pattern that I've seen in the last 2 decades, which is a COE is actually an incubation pod. This is what you use to quickly experiment things. It exists to a pilot, experiment with new technologies with little, infusion of money and capital, have a set of team which is ready to be very flexible, experiment. It exists to pilot and it exists to enable others. It provides a starter kit to adopt the technology. You build it, a framework works, now you distribute it, right? It has to provision the vision and guardrail for all. The COE is most successful when everybody in the organization have adopted it, and it's no longer just the keeper of that technology or trend, and it is actually the more of a governance mechanism, more of the Yoda, come to me if you have any questions, but take my lessons that I have disseminated and use it in your daily life, right? That's how I see the role of COE. And last but not the least, the knowledge flows not just from the COE to the rest of the organization, but it needs to flow back so that the COE is very, very mature in what it needs to do. Much ado about, let's go right to the bottom of what are the 5 stages of the RPA CoE. I take the analogy of a nursery. You want a big tree or a flower bed in your house. Not all of us have a very, very good green thumb. We may not have been in your backyards or in your front yards as much. What we do is we make a beeline to go to the nursery and say, look, somebody must have incubated, somebody must have germinated a plant. There is a little plant which is thriving. It's past its initial stages of life. We know it's going to thrive. Let me take that, come and supplant it in my home, and then take care so that it grows. That's how I feel a COE runs. There are 5 stages of how I would define it. First are the seeds. These are the ingredients which actually will make your COE successful. Not just the few processes, but the tools that you work on, what teams actually work on it, the basic ingredients to get started. The sapling stage, which is where you have the ingredients, you pilot first, you understand, you set up a core minimum viable product or functionality, you test, deploy, pilot. It's pilot, pilot, pilot. That's when, you know, the knowledge of how this can work, how it can be refined, comes into the organization. You pass the sapling stage, you know it survived, right? It's got life in it, and there is some potential, and it's not a dying seed. So now let's go to the next stage. It is the vegetative stage. You still keep it in the bag, it's still in the nursery, you feed it so that it now attains a partial growth phase, right? It becomes a toddler, it becomes a young plant. This is where you build on your pilot, you build on exceptions, you build your guidelines for RPA that you can then start disseminating. The next stage is what I call the transplantation. This is the most critical phase. This is where you federate the COE. You say, okay, people now have got this button down for most parts of it. Now I'm ready to have the other teams take it and run with it and just come back to the mothership for any guidance that they would need, or any governance that they would need, or any help that they would need. But otherwise, the COE is just enabling the rest of the organization to go ahead with it. Once the transplantation has been successful, that's where it flowers, that's where it thrives in the federated set of the organization that it has. Each group will become autonomous, and the COE is now focusing on exploring new features. You went with basic RPA, now you start looking at machine learning, see how you can actually adopt AI, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about each of these in detail, and this is where I'll also compare it with what we went through. The ingredients to make it right? The first, the seed stage. Start with a few simple processes. It's very important to identify simple processes, things which are easy to make and believe. At this stage, if you're in this stage of in the journey, there are a lot of skeptics out there. Not just because they are skeptical, but because, or they want to be skeptical, but just because they've seen a lot of initiatives. They don't know how this fits in. They don't know if this is the right story. So you want to pilot, you want to show it to them saying that, hey, look, this is something small and simple and it works. To do that, it's very important to select a few ideas to pilot with. I keep saying, just like in the nursery, you never bank with one seed. If you're planting a few plants, you'll actually probably plant a few and see what takes root. Because some seeds will not be viable and they will fail. Some of them, it'll start to germinate and then you realize you probably overwatered and it died right there. So it's important to select a few and actually start them parallelly in a kind of an agile mode. And that's where you need a very flexible team. You need a team which is ready to experiment which is ready to change course, which is open to try something very, very fast and not so much ponder about, oh my God, we tried this for like 2 weeks and it didn't work. Now we have to start all over again, right? By the way, that takes us back to not banking on one process, but taking probably a few. This is also the phase where you will select the technology or tool to pilot on. You may end up with the same tool that you piloted on, or you may decide saying that, hey, I'm going to do something completely different. But so, you can also pilot with a couple if that's what you want to do. But selecting one and going would be good because then you can focus your energies there. You need to have a seed of a strategy, right? Again, not a fully fleshed out strategy, but something very, very key as to who's our first target audience? Are we actually going to the entire business, or are we actually piggybacking on one group which seems to have the best scope for actually piloting it with? It may be because they have the most urgent needs, and hence they may be receptive to the ideas, or this is something that they've already been working on, and hence you think you can provide a panacea to their problems with the solution. Or third and most important, you have sponsorship in that group. You have people in the group who are ready to experiment and, are okay to look at how it turns out. That's extremely key. From our side, some of the key takeaways were we had to start small. It is very important to actually first pilot it and, get people's buy-in. That worked really well with us. Ideally, we should pick up a pilot that actually can be expanded on. That really works. In one area, we did that and it worked really great. In other area, the pilot that we picked up was something which was completely disconnected, which was just, something of an idea to just show them that it works. And then the next stage, we're actually starting with a whole set of few processes. And that actually creates a little bit of a time lag from the end user's perspective. So if you're able to start something which actually can be expanded on, that would be an ideal candidate as a seed. Piggyback on a larger or bigger program if possible. This actually helps a lot. It flies under the radar. You get money infusion from a bigger program which is going on, and you can just piggyback on it. That's actually been some of the most successful. Though even in our current RPA engagement, that's not the mode that we tried in because, we had sponsorship enough to start this on our own. In earlier COEs that I have set up, the piggybacking was actually the most successful method to just get started. Identify the success factors up front. More than the vision or the strategy, I think it's important to define what those success factors are. Is cost saving your success factor? Is problem solution because some processes are so tedious that they want a way out of the tedium? Is that the success factor? Is it cost benefit analysis? Is it saving people's time so that they can concentrate on doing something else, which means not really a cost saving, but just a diversion of what the cost is? Or is it just, bringing the technology together because everybody is trying so many different things out there that we don't want this to be so random and we want it to be actually centralized. What are your success factors? Identify them. It could be one or many of these or anything new. Identify those and jot it down because that's what you're going to look through the life of the program. The seedling stage. This is where it's the most critical. You want to see if it thrives, understand the process, set up the code, the happy path. It's very important. Do not look at the process and try to set up the entire process because a process is going to have a lot of, if this doesn't happen, then do this. When there is exception, do something else. And we get lost in doing that. It takes a longer time to develop when we look at a process as a whole. If you are able to chop it into different pieces, saying, hey, this is the one piece which 40% of the people use, and this is straightforward. Code it first, set it up first. Maybe it takes a week or 2 weeks. Pilot it, let them see it. then build on it. That's extremely important. Test and deploy, however rudimentary, follow the agile methodology, showcase it to them so that success sinks in. Measure the success, extremely important. Key takeaways, you need to fail fast. If something doesn't work, whether the technology doesn't work, whether the process that you have chosen doesn't work, it's important to fail fast and move on to the next one. That's the most critical here. Learn from the failures and successes and document them. We talk a lot about our failures and successes. We often do not document them. 2 stages down, when some other success hits, you've forgotten about the learnings from the failures. So please document them. Measure, and measure. Third step, this is where the young plant, you build more pieces of the process. You built a rudimentary in the pilot, everybody is happy. They say, hey, let's go ahead. And what you have done in the pilot is you've said, if it doesn't work for this rudimentary process, everything else is an exception. A human has to take a look at it and address it, right? In this stage, you start building those exception handling. You start provisioning for audit. RPA is also a journey. It is not something that's going to go into production and everybody is like, hey, it took out, 5 people's worth of effort, which I can divert to something else, right? It's not that. It's a journey. You're going to put something in. It's not for the first few weeks. There is going to be no impact. Because all the effort of the human work has gone in audit to ensure that the processes does what it says it's going to do, right? So that's extremely important. Provision for the audit, provision for the exception handling, and where human intervention is required. In our world, it's very regulatory. There is a lot of human checks and balances which are required. So automation can take you, RPA can take you to the last mile, and the human probably clicks the button to complete the last mile. These are things that you need to think about and do it in this stage. At this stage, you should have a fully functional process that should be built, and you will arrive at a good benefit case and process selection model. You will realize what processes make the best candidates, what are not the best candidates. Document those. Those are going to be very important when you come to the federation stage for it. Start building a backlog for automation. You need to have the pipeline or the hopper filled with extremely good potential ideas. This is where the idea of RPA has germinated across the organization, or at least the business groups that you're working with, and everybody, a cross section of the team. Not just, this is not top down, right? It needs to have the executive of that business, the SVPs, the VPs of that business, the managers, even the SMEs of that business involved, so that they can pick up what the right candidates are. And of course, continue to measure, and measure. The transplantation part, it's not time to relax yet, right? This is very critical. It could thrive in your COE, you take it and you supplant it, and it could fail. If you choose not to federate, there are many people who believe that the organization is not ready for a federated model and they want to keep it in there, right? If you choose to do that, you can ignore this group. This step. If you choose to do this step, this is where your COE will actually entrench the idea in different groups, preferably one by one, so that you help it take root. You will handhold, you will enable them. You will still maintain a thin COE group which does the governance, which evaluates, and which participates and helps in complex projects, or actually starts, towing their feet in the next set of technology, right? For example, for us, we have gone with basic RPA. We are toying with machine learning and artificial intelligence, but we have not gone there yet. So that's the next step that our COE will actually get involved in, right? Again, fail fast, measure. This is the last phase, the flowering phase. This is where you enjoy the fruits of your labor. Each federated group, if it is federated, or the COE, if you choose to do it centralized and if it has permeated across the organization, should start automating process on their own. Being closer to execution, the cycle time should be shortened. You will see that often the bane of a centralized COE is that everybody has to come and give their ideas to the central group. They need to evaluate and they need to say, okay, let's let's put this in the pipeline for our teams to build in. What happens in that is time lag. And that's where the businesses often get most frustrated. So if the end users, if federation goes to where the processes are actually being executed, whether it's within your own IT teams and your support teams or with your business, that's where you're likely to find the most success. The COE, as I said, participates in periodic reviews and audits, and the RPA kind of becomes a part of your life. So some of our key learnings, I think I kind of highlighted what we are already learning in the previous slides. Few things that I have not mentioned that I would mention here is that the target the cross sections of teams and not just top down, and spend effort to bring everyone on the same page on RPA. This is often the most difficult because you will realize that everybody in the organization is in different stages or different maturity level when it comes to RPA. And it's extremely important to bring everybody on the same page. We found success in we had few misstarts, everybody on different page. We did a workshop to bring everybody together, a cross section of the team, and sat with them and talked about what is RPA, what it's not, what it will do, what it will not, how we will start the journey, what are the best processes to be selected, and how we will get success. And that's what really, really worked for us. In summary, I would just highlight on a few things. COE is an incubation part. I think that's where it really, really is very helpful. Start small, select a few processes so that you have some backup. Fail fast. This, I can't emphasize on this more. Everybody thinks about small successes. I think it's more important to fail fast. You don't want to know after 3 months that that doesn't work and you need to choose something else, either a different tool, a different process, or a different approach. It's important to fail fast. Build on. Try to look at this as peeling off an onion layer. You are actually building on when you start something small and build on top of it, that's how you get success. Document the learnings, extremely important. Federate. That's my personal learning from the last 2 decades. A self-funding model. This is something that I didn't talk about much. Just a few words on this. Funding for, if you have innovation target, your organization is saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to sink in $2 million into RPA. Yay, great, lucky. Go ahead and grab it and, make things happen. If you're in organizations where we are still toying, wetting our feet, toying with the idea, not sure how much we should spend on it and if we'll get the return, we found some success with a self-funding model. We said, look, we'll start small, we'll take a pilot, we'll identify, this is when we are in stage 3, right? Your small pilot has happened and now you're starting with some, decent sized processes. Start something which is very, very small. We started a 3-month program, selected some processes which we'll know has a good cost benefit analysis to justify the investment that we are making in that phase, get the results out of it, get the benefits, sink that benefit into the next phase. That is something which really found resonation with our executive team, and basically took the risk out of it. Hey, you're thinking only a couple of $100,000 in it, and we're not talking millions until we are really ready for it, right? So that really helped. And finally, measure. People are going to ask you, what is successful? What is success? Did you achieve it? How many bots do you need to, or how many processes can a bot run? How many people equivalent of work can a bot do? These are answers that are not standard available out there because it depends, right? Quote unquote, and that's what everybody is going to tell you. So define success criteria and measure against them. Measure. That, I think, is the most important piece of it. That's all from my side. Now I'll hand it over to Sudhir for the next bit.
Hey, thank you, Priya. That was a wonderful presentation. You know what? I actually like that nursery analogy that you gave to describe the 5 stages of a COE. Now I'm going to talk about how to set up a COE, run and support and make it an effective one. In the next slide, as you see, automation is a sort of a transformation opportunity for us. It gives us a window to go back and see whether we need to re-engineer any of the processes, whether we need to go about and completely change the process. So automation is a transformation opportunity, but then there are quite a few key questions that has to be answered. Questions around the entire organization impact itself, and then questions around whether this is the right candidate for automation. How do we justify and plan for investment? And then Priya did speak about quite a lot of other open-ended questions as well. So questions around how do we prioritize the top candidates for automation? How do we balance the near-term with the long-term opportunities that will be there? Questions around the entire execution part of automation itself, like who will be the decision-making authority? How do we ensure that the value is realized quickly? How do we govern automation across multiple functions? Well, take a small example, an automation which is impacting 2 different applications managed by 2 different teams. Well, each of these teams will have their own methods of implementing automation. So how do we govern this? How do we govern automation across multiple functions? How do we scale beyond a simple test and a pilot, right? So initial stages, all of us want to test it out with a pilot. We want to do some sort of a POC. We want to do some sort of a POE and see how automation is going. But then as we scale up, do we have any sort of a practice? Do we have any sort of a pattern that we can look up to implement automation? How do we transform rather than just automate? And in the next slide, I am putting up one sort of a model which is very effective that we have seen to run a particular COE. And this is what I call as a centralized shared common functions model. Now, this particular model can be federated as well. Look it up at a high level. It consists of 2 major aspects: business motivation and automation capability. Motivation is something that drives the COE function, and capability is the end result of it. Now, I would like to describe these 4 functions of a COE in terms of the tasks and the participants involved in these COE functions. First up, strategy and governance function. It is a key function because it will help evaluate the vision, the goals, and the drivers. It sets a sort of a program charter, defines the various KPIs, and comes out with a cost-benefit matrix. Now, who are the key participants for this particular function? The key participants for this particular function would be the COE lead. We need a business sponsor, so he's another key participant. The third one is a program or a governance team. The fourth one is an automation expert. Now, what are the key tasks associated with this particular function? They are: 1, coming out with a roadmap, a strategy and a roadmap. Second one, standards, policies, and best practices, definition of them. Having some sort of a template, having some sort of a model which describes them, that a federated operation later on can just imbibe it. The third one, having a practice, a best practice to obtain funding, and then having a lead who is a business sponsor to sign off on the funding. The fourth one is a vendor management controls, and the last one is a risk and compliance controls. So 5 standard tasks built around the strategy and the governance function. They are strategy and roadmap, standards, policies, best practices definitions, risk and controls definitions, funding approvals and management, and vendor management. And the key players here, 1 is a COE lead who is going to be completely responsible for each of these activities, and the business sponsor who is required for the funding operation. Now, there will be players who would come in and exit out based upon each of these functions. And these players would be the risk analyst, compliance, SME, product architect, operations lead, and the policies lead. The second function that you see over there, the program management function, the key task in this would be related to opportunity identification, demand management, program tracking and reporting, business case and ROI measurement, board governance, and coming up with some sort of a process catalog. Here, the key players in this particular task would be the program governance team, and they would be the key player who would go about and run this entire set of functions. Of course, we need the COE lead, but he will be sort of an informative person. He or she would be a sort of an informative person, and then the automation experts would come in and go as the need arises. The next one is the change management function. Now, with regards to the change management function, I would like to highlight two key aspects. The two key tasks would be related to SME retraining. Now, there would be a lot of impact which would be coming in with regards to a business transition. So how do we manage the risk associated with it? How do we enable people to perform new roles? So everything around retraining, risk management, etc., would be a key set of tasks associated with the change management function. For this, the key player is an OCM lead. Now, just to summarize each of these functions: 1, strategy and governance; 2, program management; 3, change management. These will have standard set of players, and they would be responsible for running this. The players would be COE lead, automation expert, program and governance lead, and an OCM lead. Now, the players who would come in and go based upon the need would be the risk analyst, compliance SME, product architect, operations lead, and the policies lead. As I go into the next slide, I would like to do a deep dive into each of these functions. The first one is the strategy and the governance one. So in the strategy and the governance one, as I was mentioning early on, the key item is the automation roadmap. Now, there would be some sort of a RPA evangelization and an adoption to be done. And Priya did mention about this, and it is key. For example, when we were doing a sort of a COE exercise along with Priya, we saw that one of the key items that needs to be done before we even enter into this RPA journey would be to do a workshop. And then, the workshop will bring about ideas. The workshop will bring about a lot of open-ended questions that the team would have with regards to, embracing automation. So RPA evangelization and adoption is one of the key tasks, in the strategy and the governance function. Setting up an operating and the maintenance model, policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities. So let me just give an example here. Now, when we are doing automation, let's say you're doing an automation which involves web screens, and the web screens are the public web screens, right? So there would be some sort of a regulatory compliance that needs to be met. Now, is there a governing body which we can look up to while we go about meeting this regulatory compliance? Well, that is the role, that is the policies and the procedures which would be defined as a part of the strategy and the governance function, which would come in handy. The next one is the vendor management. I spoke about it, and then the cost benefit analysis. Cost benefit analysis is very key because you would get a lot of ideas, when you do the workshop. You would get a lot of, functional items that the business teams would come up and say that, hey, this is the one that can be automated. Hey, this is the one that, can also be automated. How do we build a cost benefit matrix around it? And the CBA is one of the key tasks that would be done as a part of the strategy and the governance piece. From Infosys, we provide quite a few accelerators to enable this particular function. The accelerators include guidelines around security and risk. Accelerators include benefit realization templates. So we provide set of templates which will help the business evaluate each of the functions and then say that, hey, this is the one that is good enough to be picked up for automation. Next up in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more on the program management. Now, one of the key tasks of the program management is demand management. So what is demand? As and when we start pushing automation inside of an industry, we would get a lot of ideas, a lot of functions, which needs to be automated. Process assessment becomes a key as a part of this demand management. And within Infosys as an accelerator, we provide something called as a process selection checklist. It will help business do a tick mark and say that, hey, okay, this is a good fit for RPA. This is a good fit, probably not for RPA because it is not prescriptive. This may need some sort of an AI component. A business case is another task that would be a key item of the, business case analysis and benefit tracking is another case, another task which is a key item for the program management. Prioritization and approvals, capacity planning are the other items. In Infosys, we also provide something called as a demand management guidelines. It's a set of defined guidelines which we have evolved from our experiences of implementing RPA. This demand management guidelines will help the customer or the client in the business unit to evaluate their demands, come out with items which are best suited for automation. One particular accelerator that I would like to talk about as a part of the program management is assisted IDM tool. Now, this is a unique offering that we provide, which more or less does the key aspect of process discovery. Now, what we have seen is in many of the business functions, there may not be detailed SOPs, system operating procedures. There may not be detailed use case diagrams or detailed functional diagrams or functional data in the form of documents, etc., and all that. How do we even analyze this particular business function and say that it is good fit for automation? That is where IDM comes into picture. IDM monitors each and every mouse click event. IDM monitors each and every keystroke action. It runs silently on the desktop of the analyst. It runs silently in the desktops, of the associates, and captures each of these information and creates a process map out of it. A process map that could be easily imported onto your automation studio and then robots generated out of this. So this particular tool that we provide as an accelerator from Infosys, which is an IDM tool, is very useful in analyzing the demands that come to the program management office. In the next slide, I'm going to do another deep dive into something called as an Automation Expert Council. Now, this particular piece or this particular function is a key item of a COE, and especially if you're going to federate the COE based upon the LOBs. Automation Expert Council function brings about experts, who are not only good in automation, but also have a sort of a business domain knowledge in different functions. Now, these are the folks who could do quick POVs, quick POCs, and then say that, hey, this particular process is going to be, a difficult one to automate, or this is the one which is going to get you the best buck for money, etc. They are going to help you create a sort of an implementation model, and then they are going to create some sort of a technical and an SME support when you want to federate your COE and start having agile teams to build automation. From Infosys, we provide automation experts who are trained across the sphere, in the various automation tools. We also have our own tool called as Assisted RPA, which comes with a robust set of features ranging from assisted automation, unassisted automation, which is RPA, and also chatbot, as well as an assisted studio. Next up, in the next slide, I'm going to talk about a little bit on change management. Now, all of us know that automation disrupts, the business function. Now, the amount of disruption depends on how much you're ready for embracing automation. Now, within Infosys, we enable effective change management through our OCM practices. Now, if you go back and remember the slide, I was talking about each of these particular functions. OCM lead is a key stakeholder. So we provide guidelines, we provide training plans that an OCM lead could use to bring about effective change management. Now, one of the key tasks here is operational readiness and training and handover. So we have defined set of guidelines about how SME retraining could be done, how SMEs could be, enabled, to take up automation as a part of their day-to-day tasks. So these were some of the deep dives into the 4 functions of a COE. And again, I would like to iterate that these functions could be centralized, shared, or it could be federated as well. Now, when you federate it, you can federate it at an LOB level as well. Finally, as I go into the next slide, I would like to share a few best practices and also the learnings that we have got from setting up these COEs. Now, these are some of the top 5 learnings that we have had, right? So RPA is early in its hype cycle of inflated expectations. So what can we do? Do a pilot. And Priya did speak a lot about this, right? So how we can do quick POCs, quick pilots, fail safe, and then exit out if that particular business function is not ready to be automated. Now, the second one, use cases that the business is most excited about. And then I did speak about quite a few items related to how we can evaluate the use cases, use some sort of a templates like the process assessment templates, etc., and then identify whether it is a best case for use for automation or not. Now, one of the key items that I would like to highlight here is what happens if a lot of pilots keep mushrooming up and there are a lot of initiatives across LOBs. So that is where our learning says that you bring about enterprise governance and a governance model to limit the POCs, to limit the POVs, and have a template-based approach that each of the LOBs can take up and then start measuring the success. Few of the other things that we have also seen is we need to deep dive into the process minutiae. It's no longer a sort of a situation wherein you just look at a process at a high level and then decide whether an automation is feasible or not. And finally, the biggest barrier to adoption and value realizations, change management and training. And I did highlight about these two items as well. So in Infosys, we bring about effective change management techniques and guidelines, and we will help you adopt automation. So that was a quick overview of one model, a sort of a centralized shared function COE model that could be federated as well. And then, each of these models could be customized based upon your industry, based upon the functions that you would like to automate in your industry. Thank you. Dan, back to you.
Hi, Dan, you there?
Hi, sorry folks, I got disconnected there for a moment. So let's take a quick poll here, David. I think we have a few more minutes. I just want to get a sense from everyone at this point after seeing this session. What are your key RPA challenges? See how we did today. And Sudhir, Priya, thank you for taking us through that. A lot of information. You guys covered a lot of great ground in a short amount of time. I think we're going to have to make this into a series so we can go deeper into each of those. I think every one of those slides probably could have been a separate session, but thanks for bringing us through that. And as soon as we finish this poll, we'll jump right into the Q&A. I know there's a bunch of questions that have come up. So here you have it. Looks like almost 50% are talking about implementation and governance. And then the winners after that are process identification and business impact. So that in mind, let me segue to some Q&A, and some of these are already kind of built into some of the questions that I've received. So here's maybe the first question, and I'll send this one to you, Priya. Is there any particular advice that you'd have from a security and an audit standpoint around on-premise versus cloud as it relates to RPA?
Now, to be very frank, I think it's the same risks and the things as in any other project. As a matter of fact, whether you decide to do it on-prem or cloud really depends upon what your processes are. For example, if the process is the use of, let's say, an on-prem, hard application, which is actually not there on the web, it may be actually very difficult for something on the cloud to actually do that. So you may actually want to do it on-prem. If a lot of your processes involve just a lot of websites, a lot of those kind of things, which it is okay. From a security perspective, we subjected to the tool, to the same kind of security checks that we do for all our tool selections. And we decided to go on-prem just because a lot of our applications were actually on-prem, and we thought that was the best way to go.
Sudhir, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think Priya covered pretty much everything. And one point that I would like to highlight is there's a lot of questions around on-prem versus cloud, but then it all just depends upon what your organization is embracing currently, and then we can have automation based upon that.
Okay. So Sudhir, back to the selection criteria. What's the key selection criteria that you recommend when you speak to clients on identifying and prioritizing different processes for RPA?
Well, that's an interesting question, Dan, and I would like to put on the selection criteria into 4 different buckets: process, technology, implementation, and the economic benefits bucket. Now, within the process bucket, one needs to look into what is the level of complexity, whether it is a rules-based analysis or not. Now, let us just remember this. RPA is all about deterministic and prescriptive processes, right? So whether it is a rules-based analysis. Third one, how much amount of screen navigation is required? The lower, the better. Is this a highly repeatable activity or not? What is the duration of this? Is it frequently executed? And does it change frequently? So these are some of the items within the process bucket. Coming to the technology bucket, the key items are that you need to evaluate is this highly structured? Is there a sort of a single sign-on for these applications? Are these stable apps, or are they likely to change? Is there any sort of a lower level environment that is available to test out automation, and how many applications are accessed as a part of this? Within the implementation bucket, few items that you may want to validate on is there a sort of a process flow available? How many number of activities or sub-activities are a part of this particular implementation? And lastly, within the economic benefits, the 3 key items are: 1, what is the reliability of this process? How many number of people today support this particular process in terms of, what is the FTE count, etc.? What is the auditability of this particular process? So these are some of the items as a part of your checklist that you may have to consider before you select a process for automation.
So, Priya, anything you would add, and I'll add another question to that, which is what kind of metrics are captured by the COE? What things do you measure to determine success?
Sure. One thing to add on the process selection criteria, this is a software thing, but often on a day-to-day basis plays the biggest role. What's the sponsorship or the mind share of the teams where you're selecting the process? You may have the best process which ticks off all the boxes that Sudhir said, and actually, to be very frank, very important. We have to have the selection criteria, but if you don't have the mind share of the business, you're going to find an uphill battle just to convince them to pilot with you or to go down there, right? So it's very important to select processes which are, of course, have a good CBA, which are deterministic, which are low judgment, which have got some good volume so that you can show the benefit. But select those which have, sponsorship, which have people ready to go on it so that you can show the successes. Nothing succeeds like success. Once the others see the successes, they will want to join the bandwagon, right? On to your other question on critical success factor measures, we've kept it simple. We are actually looking at 3 main success factors. One is the time that it has taken to put something into production. This is extremely important because you also need to make a judgment on, is RPA the best way to solve this problem, or is there any other way to solve it, right? So if the traditional coding methods actually to, let's say, enhance the application, etc., is a better way, then maybe you want to do it. You don't want to do RPA. So that's a very, very good, important, critical measure. The second one, well, not really in the same order, but number 2 is actually the cost-benefit analysis itself, right? The ROI. How much did we think we'll get a lift out of it? Now, it could be a hard dollar amount, as in saying that, hey, this set of tasks which are done, if this is a new set of tasks. If I need to now set up 10 people to do it, it's going to cost me so much. But instead, if I can do RPA, it will just avoid me so much of cost. That's a huge cost saving. That's one way. Or second way to look at it is, I have something extremely important or extremely critical which needs to be addressed, but I don't want to add people. So I want to free up my team who are doing very mundane, repetitive, low judgment tasks and divert them into these critical activities, right? So the CBA or the cost-benefit analysis is the second metric that we are looking at. The third metric that we are looking at is actually just how much can the RPA, the robot achieve itself, right? Because that's a metric which is actually not out there at all. It is nothing standard. You take any tool, you can't really say that a robot is going to mean X amount of processes or X amount of people's work. So that is something which is a measure for us. We are trying to see how much we can so that it will help us predict how we are, going to estimate this in the future. So these are just three things that we are looking at right now.
Great, thank you. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Priya, thank you so much for sharing your story, and Sudhir for explaining this in a great amount of detail. I've got a bunch of questions here that we didn't get to, so we'll promise to follow up with everyone on those. And thank you again to EdgeVerve for sponsoring and co-hosting this event with us today. Very quickly, the conversation continues. We have a couple more webinars in this series over the next few weeks on cognitive orchestration and intelligent automation. And our event series begins in April, actually it begins in March in Paris, and then our annual Oasis Roadshow will run April through June. So hopefully we'll get to a city near you and get to meet you all face to face. Thanks so much everyone for joining, and thanks again to the EdgeVerve team. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.